All right, so I think we're gonna get going. I mean, I've way too much content for a 20-minute talk. So thank you for attending my talk. I hope you've enjoyed the other speakers that you've had today. And I know it's right before lunch, so I'll try not to hold you too long. This is not going to be a how to threat model talk or what threat modeling is talk. We just don't have enough time. The whole point of this is kind of shape why and how you can increase the velocity of adoption of services for your business and what that is all about. So kind of as I saw there, I'm laughing. I assume people know what that means. They've experienced that, they've heard it. This is all too common in, when I was a consultant doing this is what I heard all the time. I'm at Citibank, very large regulated bank around the world. This happens all the time. So how do I then enable them to get the services and use cases they need out the door? Like time to market is the measurement. So these types of things, we need to figure out how to enable them so they don't do this. The why are we here today? Again, this isn't a threat modeling talk. This is just how do I use threat modeling or use a process to enable the business more quickly. And at the end of this is more of you feel informed about how techniques and methods you can use to enable the business to get to market quicker, and maybe join the communities that exist out there that I'll share and talk about. So again, not threat modeling talk. Threat modeling is just a process. Everybody has a different definition of what it is or where it should be used, but essentially well-defined. It shouldn't be, you think it's this, you think it's this, and the developer in the back says, I'll do it my own way. I don't like those other two. So a lot of smaller, less mature capabilities exist like that, but at scale or when you're trying to unify on how you represent your business or your customers, these things must exist before you go to market. If you're doing it all differently, they're going to be very confused and generally upset, because when I talk to you, I got out the door in 2 minutes. When I talked to you, your report was 110 pages. It took me 6 months. There needs to be some normality. A lot of these things, and I don't need to read the slides, so you guys will have the slides and all that kind of stuff, but the point of this slide is why have a process that's well-defined and integrated into your overall program? Because all of these things you can deliver on. And these are all the things for any mature business process that you're going to encounter. So at finance or other in your business, they already have metrics. They already know, if I build this thing, I get this much money back. That's the efficiency of the process. Threat modeling typically is new to a lot of organizations. I know it's become very popular in the last 5 or 6 years outside of government. That's good. And I join a lot of communities and have these discussions to try and evangelize. But really, I think people are not really getting to the point of bringing it back to the business, time to market. This is the real value that at Citi and other customers I've worked with, we've been able to show this and demonstrate this metric. And so that is from the first day someone makes a formal request to use a service or group of services in cloud, to enablement of you can pull a module and do your deployment as you wish. That's the metric. And so that's what is the context of this conversation. And I'm not even going to put the maturity of the process in there. It's just the value stream, request to delivery. A lot of these slides, I kind of put in the questions I want you thinking in your head to ask yourself. So if everybody has a question while I'm speaking, feel free to stop me, ask that question. A lot of the things that are important about a well-defined process are you start to be able to measure efficacy. You start to be able to do things like, oh, we have a lot of authorization challenges in our applications or infrastructure. So training or technology or other. Those are the types of things that kind of come through maturity. There's going to be process improvements, and we're going to get into that in the next couple of slides, but the well-defined process and the repeatability of it allows you to start focusing on efficiencies, improvements, and just general quality. Again, rate of adoption. Does anybody have a rough number they want to throw out for how long it takes from a business request to deployment? Is anybody brave enough to share where they're at? What I've experienced, I was working at AWS, so global customers, it was 18 months. And each of those customers had a novel approach to how they would review this. And that would be sometimes your enterprise architecture team would sit there and pontificate for 12 to 18 months on theoretical things. There was no framework for the thought. It was just, I'm reading stuff, I'm talking to people, I'm not really comfortable, so we're not going to do this. But they'd hit that magical marker, 18 months, and then say, okay, developers, you can start using this service. But there was no code, there was no prescriptive guidance, there was no alignment to your risk posture, meaning your policies and standards or other security frameworks that you measure to determine, are there actual threats here? So then the developers would start doing things, and we all know sometimes if you are not a security professional, you are all about features and capability and velocity to get it done. And that's where a lot of customers start to fail. So obviously, I'm working at a global regulated bank. We don't allow things to go through without thorough review. So again, this process, having well-defined, well-matured, has helped that. So we're down. Does anyone want to take a guess? Business request for an idea to our lowest level environment to just figure out the idea. Anybody else? Thank you for being brave and speaking. 2 weeks. The reason we can do that is because we've built enough controls, guardrails. We have demonstrated efficacy to all of our follow-on compliance and other functions. So we have second line defense, we have third line defense, IA, ORM, things like that. We've been through our regulator reviews globally. They've all kind of said, hey, this is a good process. And you can demonstrate one, completeness. You actually have controls and a process that's well-defined. Two, you have evidence that the controls actually work. Three, you have code that your users can download and you can demonstrate access control to that and they're actually using it and you can confirm it in your operations environment. All those things come from high maturity. You may start at a lower maturity where it's just, I'm reviewing stuff and I wasn't doing it before. That's better than where you were before. You'll mature to, I've written down what I'm doing and everybody that does it is starting to do the same thing. That's, kind of the next steps. That's kind of what I want to talk about here for adoption and things like that. It's not about you have to do where I said where city is today. It's just kind of knowing that that may be a target for you. Somewhere along that maturity curve is where you want to be. Because if you're not regulated, you might not have to have so many processes. But if you care about security, you probably want to start at least asking questions of what type of data am I putting out there? Do I need to protect it? Do my customers care? Like if it's the lunch menu, I don't need to invest a lot of infrastructure reviewing that, but I can post it in my S3 bucket all day long. That's the type of stuff where find your path. So they want to show you this slide and then have people figure it out. But this is something where to production, this is kind of some metrics of what the program has produced. So I knew this would be a pretty short talk, so I just kind of wanted to get to the meat of it of fine, great, you're telling us about a process, but what does it actually do? What have you actually done? And these are just some metrics that I wanted to share. Does anybody measure anything in this way in their environment? Does anybody have a threat modeling program in their environment? Okay. Anybody have a security department? I got a couple. All right, cool. I should reverse that. How many people are developers in the room? All right, more. Okay, so this is not bashing developers at all. The process I've developed actually engages the developers early on. And where I'm trying to get to my maturity model is we spent a lot of time building these controls, defining what the environment is and all that kind of fun stuff. I, at this point, know what the regulator needs us to do. I know what we think is good enough from an infrastructure security and application security perspective. And that when you create a key, it has to be in this region. It has to be these types of controls, so forth and so on. Now, where I'm moving to is I'm going to give my developers a UI where they have an idea, they can just start plugging it in. This service, this service, this service, in this region of the world, public or private, so forth and so on. It builds the Terraform module for them. They say, yeah, that sounds about right. And then they send it through the process. I've demoed this. I can get this done in a week because of the controls we've already built and getting rid of a lot of the process in between now. So threat modeling, the use case ingestion, I'm getting an echo here, things like that. So I really, I felt that that's been a massive change from my experience for doing this for several years. I don't know if you guys feel that's a good thing or bad thing, but as a developer, you raised your hand there on the corner of the front row here. You're a developer. How do you present your use cases and get them ready for production?
I've been both developer and security side. It's a process from the business comes down to requirements. They get discussed and decomposed between the architects and the developers down into work, requirements and stories. Those then get presented at, I'll say, sort of group level or product level from product owners with information security analysts, along with the architects who review it at a high level, decide if it needs to be threat modeled and what level of review. And then threat modeling session can be scheduled with the development team to verbally go through that as the developers prior to the meeting, diagram, whatever it is necessary, or fill out. So, template document to bring it and talk through, addressing questions, and then if there's things that need to be worked, they'll be added as stories.
Yeah. Great. Does people have similar process to that ish? Sure. One of the big things, I just gave a talk at Forward CloudSec a couple days ago. There's a different focus, but still threat modeling. The part of that I was trying to focus on for that audience, and I think it's important here when we're talking about this process, is engineering. Security needs to go directly into engineering. So my threat modeling team writes the threats, writes the controls that they think would mitigate the threats, and they put it in like a Gherkin language. So that's easier to understand. Gherkin is just like a pseudocode language that describes something in more plain English. And that way, when it goes through the Jira ticket workflow, ends up at the engineering teams, and they can more rapidly adopt and build the controls. And they can then write their test cases to show not just, can I lint this out and say 0 or 1, it actually does a performance test and determines, does the intent of the control get enforced? I'll give a real world example. Amazon has services that have to have certain things done at the platform level to ensure performance and other things like that, because they have their own SLAs. We discovered through this type of testing that there was a break in encryption from where we input and where we ended up at the other side. That sort of thing is because we did behavioral testing rather than just, I configured the service to be encrypted. And so those types of things are really useful. That's why we write the control in that way. So the engineers think about that and go, oh yeah, I get you're wanting this configured this way, but the intent is to actually have end-to-end encryption. So how do I actually demonstrate that? And it's the demonstration and the integration with engineering that has really made us more mature more rapidly. And now I can give the developers an opportunity to just say, this is what I want. Here's a Terraform module, run it through all your processes. And I can do that because I know the options they had to choose from, the things that we've selected. So they get freedom to put it where they want for how they want it. And then they have created the Terraform for us so we can more rapidly run it through our process and then give it to them. Simple to complex, we kind of cover some of these things that for the slide purpose, I put it in things at the top of methodologies. There's a ton of methodologies that you can use. On the bottom, these are going to be more things that the details of these things. What kind of context information do I need to think about? This may be what you have today if you've documented something. It's just literally a process flow. Simple enough, and you have it so it's repeatable and people know what it is. This is like a 1/10 of what my process is at Citi. Some of these things are on the left. Can you, like around here? This is kind of an end-to-end of the threat modeling. You have your inputs and outputs and things like that. This is a data flow diagram for a service. It's probably a bit more intense than most of you are used to seeing, because it's every API action. It's trust boundaries. It's threats overlaid. It's a lot of things involved in that. This here is kind of a larger process of outside of my threat modeling process. Where do I exist in? And a lot of these is, how do I demonstrate, when I told you about the behavioral testing, I need to demonstrate that. All right, I know pretty much getting to the end, I wanted to save room for questions. Whether it's a simple or complex process, it's kind of up to you where you want to be and how mature that you need to be. I think a lot of the things that you might consider in a threat modeling program and how you can move more quickly into the environment, reduce your time to market metric, are going to come from increasing your maturity in this type of process. So with that, I mean, if 200,000 plus person company globally can move to cloud in 2 weeks for a lower level environment, but that's something I think any company can do. So I'll leave room for questions.
Do you have more of the detail in this process you've established publicly available? Something like that?
It's something I'm working on being able to make that public. As this has been regulated, I can't talk too much about our details internally, because then I'm making public statements about our infrastructure and other things like that, and we're not allowed to do that.
Well, generic.
I'll let you know I am working on that, and I'm trying to release a paper for that to have a lot of details around this. Overall, I mean, what specifically are you interested in from a process perspective?
Well, all of it, but in more like actually broken down to specific details. Okay, you're saying you're providing pre-baked Terraform modules. To what level of detail or scale? I mean, is that actually the security department writing that, or is this the development teams who bake those, who then collect in a repository of established accepted best practice modules that the developers will modify it, bring it through?
No, that's a good question. The Terraform module one, I'll address that one. The controls are built by the security engineering team. We partner with our infrastructure organization and build the Terraform module, because typically it's infrastructure that's going to own the service, because from an operational perspective, they have that responsibility in our organization. And they will maintain the repo and change as things change over time, all this other stuff. It kind of flows back through the process. But that is just, the repos are known to our developers and lines of business, and we advertise that this service is available. Here's where the repo is, things like that. In our threat modeling process, when things are getting threat modeled, they actually, instead of it just being like a paper report, it shows them in the diagram where the problems are. It integrates with our JIRA, and so it just creates all the JIRA tickets with, this is where the module is, this is the policy that's applied to it. We map out to attack or other frameworks that we use to cover all the types of technology. And so all the contextual information is available to the developer in the ticket. And that updates our diagrams as they close. Does that answer? Cool.
How do you assure that the development teams are using those?
Signature checks, so pipeline preventative controls. And then also nobody has access to the console, or what does Azure call it? Portal. GCP is console too, but yeah. everybody assumes roles, everything's pipeline based. Yeah. Any other questions? I worked out a bunch of questions that I thought would be things people would want to know. Oh, sorry.
That's okay. When you mentioned the end-to-end encryption that was broken,
Mhm.
what was the fix? How did you?
Amazon had to fix it.
Amazon.
This is, again, that shared responsibility model, but we were able to detect that it wasn't happening.
Right. Okay.
And so we put in our PFR and complain a lot, and then it gets fixed.
Right.
So, yeah. Mhm.
What's the process like if there's, say, AWS comes out with a new service that your developers want to use? Is it this same process to get those Terraform modules and everything else approved?
It's the same process. The way for that component of our process, I purchase content from a third party. I just did a public talk with them in California. They're called Trust on Cloud. And they basically, one second, and then they basically pre-threat model a lot of stuff. They don't cover everything, but it's how we do that to our lower level environment, because we've already built a lot of our guardrails. Now it's just, what are the really critical things of this new service? We'll be able to load controls for them and then enable it for the developer to see, does this really do what I want? Yeah.
Your question, whether do I need a different threat model process for like app versus infrastructure versus cloud? Like if it needs to be different, like how do you handle it when your like code bases are infrastructure as code?
Right. So
Sorry.
I have argued a process is a process. And if you have a good process, you don't need different processes. That's why when I was mentioning attack or CWEs or other frameworks, that can cover app, infrastructure, other. And it's the same process though, because really I need artifacts that demonstrate that I've reviewed this and I have a common vocabulary on how I represent what threats are. Really focusing on threats, not risk. That's another big thing. Threat modeling is about threats. It's not about risk. Risk is a different function. And then the controls and the output of that. So what does that look like? And then in your overall process, not just threat modeling, where do you fit into that from gates or artifacts? Anyone else? A lot of the challenges of starting this out is buy-in. What's the value of this? I think overall threat modeling, I had a slide on that, kind of with the things that you can demonstrate through threat modeling, but just talk about not necessarily the outcomes and all that stuff. Talk about why don't we want to know what threats exist in our environment? Are we okay deploying infrastructure or applications without asking questions about them first of how do they work and how does it really integrate? Because when people do drawings and they come into us, they used to come in as stick figures. And it was, this is me, this is the cloud, that's the internet. I'm going to put an application in there. And that was pretty much the gist of it. I'm sure you've all experienced that. Now we have a well-defined process of how to create those and what things need to be answered in that diagram. So we have all the API actions. We have trust boundaries. We have the ability to show common reference architecture. So that's another group I manage at Cities. So we don't have to have novel representations of architecture or just they completely omit it. They just drag and drop into our Confluence shapes that we've already pre-built. And those are also in our threat modeling tool that have all the threats already done. So we don't have to keep redoing things. And so now instead of my core team of about 8 threat modelers, I've expanded to all of our lines of business. And by the end of next year, we'll have hundreds of threat modelers because we've trained them and they don't have to be as experienced as us because a lot of the base stuff is already done. So like app dev people could threat model their own work. It still goes through the process, but a lot of the work's already been done. And so therefore they can show value by, look how much quicker we move. So, all right, the gist of this is, not to focus so much on threat modeling, but just the how to move faster to market with threat modeling. So does anybody, this is bullshit, I don't believe you? So if there is, that's fine. Happy to talk about it and kind of show you more detail when I'm not being video recorded. So, but yeah, that's, yeah, we could all go to lunch.